Here early. I think you just gave them. They were here early. Those are the dual consultants. Those were the dual consultants. Okay, she's the oldest one. Let's do it. All right. Let's do it. Thank you for the break. So we are back in the room, and now we're going to hear about the year-end audit for fiscal year 2025.
Yes, I'll introduce our partner, Emily Subzik. She's with Green Finney, and we'll present our FY25 results. Wes has got some slides, I think.
Good evening. I'm Emily Sobchak. I'm the audit partner with Green Finney Folly, and I'll be presenting the results of the fiscal 2025 financial statement audit this evening. I'll give you just a minute to pull that up. Go ahead and go on to the next one. Before we get into the numbers, it's important to remember that the city is responsible for the financial statement report. Everything that's in the report, the numbers, the disclosures, all that information is provided by the city. And they are providing that information at year end for audit purposes, but you are also receiving financial information throughout the year, making strategic decisions on behalf of the city based on that information. And so it's important that you have good policies and procedures in place to ensure that that information is complete, accurate, and reliable. It's also important that within those procedures you have internal controls in place to mitigate the risk of misstatement in your financial information. Next slide. Our responsibility then is to audit the financial information provided and issue an opinion based on our audit. We have issued an unmodified opinion again this year. That is a clean opinion. That's the opinion that you want. And that opinion provides reasonable assurance that the financial statements are materially correct. So reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but it's not absolute. We're not auditing every single transaction that occurred during the year, and we're also using materiality in designing our audit procedures. So we'll start out by looking at your general fund. Your general fund had an increase in fund balance of $2.9 million, bringing total fund balance to $16.8 million as of June 30th. Included in that $16.8 million, we have restricted fund balance that's restricted by state law of $25,000 for victim services. And then we have committed fund balance. These commitments are made by City Council, and they total $1.9 million for a variety of different purposes. We then have assigned fund balance. Assigned fund balance was $7 million for fiscal 25, and that represents the appropriated fund balance included in your fiscal 26 budget. And so it's important to note there that the amount of assigned fund balance did increase pretty significantly as you have the upcoming infrastructure capital projects that are being partly funded through grants, but you're also using some city matching funds for those projects, and that's the bulk of what's included in that $7 million. So when we remove those classifications, we're left with unassigned fund balance of $7.9 million. We compare that to your 2025 actual expenditures, total general fund expenditures, and we're looking at about 59%. If we take out the capital and debt service expenditures and really just focus on the operating expenditures of the fund, you're closer to 80% of fund balance in your unassigned fund balance, or I'm sorry, of expenditures in your unassigned fund balance. We provide a couple of benchmarks here. The first comes from the Government Finance Officers Association. That's a national organization that provides a benchmark for governments to maintain at least 2 months of expenditures in their unrestricted fund balance. A number of reasons why it makes sense for the city of Folly Beach to maintain a higher fund balance than that, which is why the city's policy says that your minimum fund balance will be 30%. Some of those reasons why it's important to have that healthy fund balance available. A big one is for cash flow purposes. We're measuring fund balance as of June 30th, but of course your property tax revenues don't start coming in until about January. So having that healthy fund balance allows you to meet your cash flow needs in the second half of the calendar year without having to issue short-term debt. Also, of course, as a coastal community, you're more susceptible to natural disasters, and while we hope that FEMA or other programs would provide funding should a hurricane come through, we know from experience that even when that funding is available, it often takes quite a while to come in, sometimes years. And so having the fund balance allows you to meet those immediate cash flow needs, and you know, do things like meet payroll, again, without having to issue debt, which of course saves the city interest over time. Your general fund revenues totaled $12.5 million for the year. That was a 14% increase from the prior year. However, I'll note that that increase was primarily driven by a non-recurring funding source, which was the court settlement related to the Airbnb case. That was $1.6 million. Your revenues did come in 5% better than what you had budgeted. And in addition to your operating revenues, we also report net other financing sources. This is primarily your transfers from other funds of $3.7 million. Your general fund expenditures totaled $13.3 million for the year. That was a 12% increase from the prior year, as you did see some significant increases in your personnel costs. Those were approved pay increases, much of it related to the compensation study that was performed. Sorry, you're right, just a second. When comparing your expenditures to budget, expenditures were well below budget by about 23%. That was the result of some capital projects that were budgeted to begin in fiscal 25, but that got delayed and deferred to fiscal 26. Now, when we look at all of your governmental funds combined, so your general fund plus your accommodations funds, beach preservation, local hospitality, and tourism, we're looking at a total governmental revenues of $18.9 million compared to expenditures of $14.8 million. And we've got net other financing sources of $146,000. That primarily represents proceeds from the sale of assets. When we look at your governmental funds, we're focusing on current assets and current liabilities, and so that's why we refer to that equity as fund balance. Your enterprise funds are reported a little bit differently because they are intended to operate more like businesses. And so your enterprise funds, in addition to current assets and liabilities, also report long-term assets and obligations, and the equity of these funds is referred to as net position. So the water fund had an increase in net position of $630,000, bringing total net position to $3.5 million as of June 30th. Included in that $3.5 million, the majority is invested in your capital assets, your utility system, and so that net investment totaled $2 million. On the sewer fund, you had an increase in net position of $164,000, bringing total net position to $2.7 million. And again, a portion of that, about $413,000, is invested in your capital assets, so not in liquid form. You also have $44,000 in restricted funds. Next, we'll look at your capital assets for the city as a whole. Your total capital assets were $18.1 million. That was an increase of $1.9 million as your capital additions exceeded your depreciation expense for the year. Looking next at the long-term debt. Total long-term debt was $2.8 million. That was a decrease from the prior year as you had your scheduled principal payments and there were no new issuances during the year. Another long-term obligation is your compensated absences. This is your earned but unused leave. That totals $918,000, and you can see the breakdown there. One change that was recently made related to change in accounting standards is that in the past, we would accrue leave based on what you expected to ultimately pay out. So that was primarily your comp time and your vacation time. But due to change in accounting standards, we are now accruing leave that is expected to ultimately be used. So not necessarily paid out, but eventually used. And so that's why we also report your sick leave, even though it's not paid out upon termination. The final long-term obligation that we'll talk about is your net pension liability. As you'll likely recall, this is not a direct liability of the city. Rather, it is your proportionate share of the net pension liabilities of the state retirement system and the state police officers retirement system. So this is not a liability like an accounts payable that you're expected to write a check to pay off. Rather, you are expected to pay the contribution rates at those rates mandated by the state. And so the net pension liability itself doesn't have an impact on your operating budget or your cash flows, but the employer contribution rates certainly do. And those rates are significant at 18.5% and 21.2% for fiscal 25. The good news is those rates did not increase from fiscal 24 and they have not increased to fiscal 26. However, over the past about 15 years, they have increased significantly. So if we look at those rates just 10 years ago, we were looking at a rate of 11.5% and 15%. So those big jumps in those employer contribution rates do directly impact your budget. And so it's very important that when you're making personnel decisions, that you're considering not only the salary component, but also the significant fringe benefit component that comes on top of that. We perform our audit each year in accordance with government auditing standards. And so in addition to the opinion that's in the front of your report, you'll have a second opinion in the very back of the report that describes our responsibilities when it comes to government auditing standards. One of those responsibilities is if we identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in your internal controls, or if we were to identify material noncompliance, then we are required to report those. When we propose significant auditing adjustments, those also need to be reported. And so we did have some significant adjustments this year related to the financial year-end closeout. Throughout the year, the city operates more on a cash basis. You're recognizing expenses when cash disbursements are made, revenues when they're received. But for audit purposes at year-end, we have to make some accruals to reflect receipts that came in after year-end that related to fiscal 25, or payments that were made after year-end that related to goods or services received prior to year-end. And so, like I said, we did have to make some audit adjustments related to those accruals, but nothing that indicates any systemic issues with day-to-day operations. For years when your federal expenditures exceed $750,000, a single audit would be required. Federal expenditures did not exceed that threshold this year, so that additional compliance audit was not required for fiscal 25. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Like I said, good, healthy, strong financial condition, unmodified opinion. We always appreciate working with the city, and I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Can you start it over again?
Everybody good?
Pretty good.
All right.
Well, I think we owe Leah congratulations as well, so.
Absolutely.
Here.
Yeah, we put him through the ringer this year, so
Well, thank you for your time.
thank you.
Next up on the agenda will be our sewer system survey, and then we'll go right into the sewer and water system rate study.
I assume it's not gonna be so draining. I'd throw it out there.
This is Jamie Doe, she's with the,
You waited 3 weeks for that, I bet.
this is Jamie Doe, she's with JMT, she's our consultant that did the study.
Hi. First of all, thank you all for giving us an opportunity to do that. We do appreciate that. And I'm gonna try to keep this short because I know Raquel, this is probably who you really wanna hear from that's doing your rate study. And as thrilling as it is to watch hours of sewer videos, I've kinda condensed it to just a few pictures. Overall, your system looks pretty good. It needs cleaned. But otherwise, there's a few joints that have kind of separated, but that's just a simple point repair. It's not we're not recommending that you have to go in and, replace thousands of feet. That's not an issue at all for you all. The biggest problem is you've got a lot of sand in your sewer lines. Of course, I'm not sure where that would have come from, right? This picture is pretty typical of what most of your system looks like. We'll say that discoloration, we'll call that sludge. It's just built up on the walls. That's actually Shadow Race Lane, is where that one's from. This is another that's pretty typical. And that one you can see, this is on what we call West Center Street. So it's not actually on Center Street, it's in this alleyway on the west side of Center Street is where the sewer line is. And you can kind of see there, like you can see the water level, but then below that you can see that discoloration, that's sand. Just to kind of give you an idea, and that is down on this end. As we get closer to the pump station, it gets deeper and deeper. And then the next slide. So this is a manhole there on 3rd Street, 3rd West, just between Hudson and Indian. So you've got a little pump station there at the corner of Indian and 3rd. This is just before it goes into that pump station. That line is backed up. And you can see that there. We couldn't get the camera into the pipe there. The other problem that we noticed is this is pretty common as we're getting close to pump stations. So the other recommendation would be to coordinate with probably JIPSD, because they monitor your pump stations, coordinate with them to get maybe alter your pump run times so that their pumps are kicking on a little bit more regularly, so it's not backing up into your system like that. There was no real evidence of like surcharge, so you're not having that problem. You just don't want it settling in your pipes for very long.
And running it more will flush that sand farther down?
It won't do anything with the sand, but it will get the water out of the way. This is a manhole on Little Oak Island. It's the same deal. You can see the water standing in the bottom. You can't see the pipes even where they're coming in and out. And it's the same deal. It's the manhole just upstream from that pump station. So as the pump stations operate a little bit more regularly, it'll keep that pulled out.
And so after this one fills, it backs up to the next manhole cover?
It
And then
does.
the next
Yeah,
manhole
except
cover
it doesn't, I mean, it's not going all the way to the top. It's just,
seeks its own level, yeah.
yeah, maybe 8 inches deep or something in the bottom.
So this doesn't really present any problem,
No.
it's just,
No, you just don't want, it seems ridiculous to describe sanitary sewer. It will turn septic. You would think it already is.
right,
And then it'll, produce gases that'll deteriorate your lines and stuff a little bit more quickly, so you want it moving as much as you can.
Is there a time frame we should look at the sand remediation?
That's a great question, and I'll look into that, but nothing was like your manhole steps, those still look pretty good. They will rust and fall apart, you know, when you're in a critical time. I think you're still good with that now. It's something you do wanna work with them about.
Yeah, if we can get like a timeline.
Yeah. Okay. This is a manhole on Hudson, at the corner of Hudson and 3rd Street. The other thing that we found, other than sand, is like just random building materials and stuff. I think you have a packet printed, maybe in yours. The second picture on that, there's that's a chunk of asphalt. It looks to be about the size of a decent sized baked potato. Just to give you an idea. We found that on Hudson, and we found that a few times on West Ashley down here. I have no idea where chunks of asphalt would have come from, but they are in your lines, so.
Patchwork on the roads, DOT doing the corner filling ditches or filling
Yeah.
erosion. You know, we have a lot of drop-off areas at the corners, we have to put in a fix request. And when they come out to fix it, it's just patchwork asphalt.
It just crumbles and so.
It crumbles and it's got chunks of it.
we still gotta get into a closed system.
That's
Well,
not,
except that on the corners of some of those, they've got in the corners, they've got the runoffs.
That's storm.
But that's
The
storm.
stormwater
Storm,
sewer.
yeah.
Okay.
This would be,
Sewers are closed.
stuff like that would get in the system from possibly broken cleanouts and whatnot.
Okay. The new construction cause that too, Phil? Does
Sir?
new construction cause that too?
Yeah. Possibly.
And then this is just kind of a map of the sewer system on Folly Island. And the areas highlighted in yellow are where we had to abandon the survey. We couldn't get the camera all the way through. Either the sand was too deep that it wouldn't push through, or the water was too deep and we were underwater and we had to abandon. We were underwater. So that, for most part, most of it we were able to see.
So the yellows are the priority to clean out, or
Clean, yeah.
those Doesn't look great, really.
Well, if we're only talking about cleaning though, that's really maintenance
Not
that
replacement.
we just need a schedule to,
Yeah, if you could get us a timeline, I'd love to see just what we're up against.
yeah,
Really no immediate replacement requirement.
No. no. No, there are a few, like I said, joints that have separated a little that are just point repairs, but nothing major. And then I think, the next one, yeah, is Little Oak Island, and it's the same right there. There's the pump station there at the end as you're coming near the main road there. That little section is kind of backed up.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have any questions? No? So I'm gonna turn it over to Will and Ford, and they're with Raftellus, and we partnered with them, and they did the rate study for the project.
So that was kind of the plan, was to get them to do the study to feed into our rates for the sewer system to know if there was capital needs. So this is the first time the city's ever done a 100% scoping or close thereto of the sewer system, so we had no idea what the condition was. Walking in, eyes wide open, these gentlemen had access to the information sheet we provide, so.
He has an idea of what it costs to do that scoping, and you're working that into the rate study?
We actually paid for that already. That was a resolution the council passed a while back to pay for the consulting fees, so it's already covered.
Good job.
You don't remember that?
All right. I'm sorry for the old school notes, but good evening. My name is Ford Moriarty. I'm here with my colleague Will Kerr, and we're just going to present some of the preliminary results of that water and sewer financial planning and rate study to you all. Tonight, these are really just the preliminary results, and we really wanted to get your feedback and make sure that you guys were comfortable with the numbers and kind of the direction that we're going. So, before I get into the results and the numbers, just a quick background of what we're doing in this study. A financial plan, the goal of this is to set up an annual cash flow over a 5 to 10 year period on a cash needs basis. So what we've done is actually built a fairly sophisticated rate model where we can look at some of the key cost and revenue drivers, as well as looking at some of those existing financial policies that we use as a balancing mechanism that gives us an idea of what rate or revenue increases that there might be over the forecast period. Touching on a few of the key assumptions in the model. On the revenue side, our model actually projects user charge revenue using actual customer billing data and rates. We used last year's billing information. We do have a slight assumption of growth over that forecast period for customer accounts and usage. On the expense side, we're basing the study off of the FY26 operating budget, and we also have some inflationary increases on that as well. One other thing, I'll touch on this on the next slide, but we are projecting an annual payback to the general fund for a larger capital project on the water side. So we just want to give you the assumptions that we use for that. Paying that back over 25 years at 2.5% interest. But as you can imagine, the biggest cost driver is really that capital plan. On the water side, we're looking at almost $13.5 million in capital expenditures over the next 8 years. We worked with the city to come up with a proposed capital funding program. Like I said, we have that $4.5 million loan from the general fund. We also have an additional $4.6 million in additional grants and contributions. But the remaining amount, we really wanted to look at a blend of using reserves and also some strategic debt for a larger capital project in that out year. It's a larger project that will also extend and be benefited by from future rate payers. We want to make sure that we're extending the cost of that over the future rate payers as well. So these are the assumptions on the water side. Right now on the sewer side, we're just doing assuming $250,000 in cash spending This is also subject to change, you know, at the time of the study, we haven't finished that sewer evaluation quite yet, so hopefully next month, we'll have some final numbers for you on the sewer side. Okay, so that's kind of just setting the stage for this. This is really where the rubber hits the road in the study. These are kind of the key outputs of the study. I know it's a little busy on this slide, so I'll walk through each one of these graphs, starting with that financial plan. You know, this is really a visual representation of that financial plan that I've been talking about. The bars represent those expenses, so you see that dark bar is your operating expenses. The darker green bar is your proposed debt starting in FY26. That's really more of that repayment to the general fund, and then also that future strategic borrowing starting at 29. And then that lighter green bar is your cash funded capital, or what we call PAYGO. You know, on the flip side, when we're thinking about revenues, that dotted green line is your revenues at existing rates. So that's revenues that you would generate year over year if you did not have any rate increases or revenue increases. And as you can see, you know, your expenses are kind of surpassing those revenues, especially on those out years. And what that would mean is we'd be drawing down all of our reserve funds. So what the study is indicating to us is that we're really looking at about 6% overall revenue increases to fund those capital or cash needs, while also kind of maintaining those financial policies. You can see first the top graph on the right, that debt coverage. We want to make sure that we have enough revenues to cover those debt. And we also want to make sure that we have enough reserves in the bank to you know, to have just a healthy reserve. And right now our target for that is 180 days of cash on hand. You know, quickly on that reserve balance chart, you also, that lighter blue line is also the capital reserves. I talked that we're actively drawing down some of those capital reserves as well to fund some of those capital projects. On the next slide, you know, this, I think we're trying to accomplish two things on here. First is to kind of show you some different funding scenarios and what the impacts are on rates. And also just to give you a sense of, you know, what those impacts are on your customer bills. What this is looking at is a typical residential quarterly billed customer using 15,000 gallons. So that first scenario is what our Ralph Gillis you know, financial plan, using that strategic debt and the available funds or capital funds to fund some of those capital projects. You can see those 6% rate increases, you know, over the forecast period. But we also want to show, you know, in scenario 2, if we decided not to do that, that strategic debt, you can see that if we're cash funding more of those projects, that the rate increase would need to be higher in those initial years to cover those larger capital expenses. And then scenario 3 is obviously just cash funding all of the capital projects. You can kind of see the trend of rate increases. But again, this is really kind of thinking about it, a fully baked capital plan. You know, it could change, especially if there were any additional grant revenues that we could receive that could bring these rate requirements down. But just wanted to kind of give you a directional look of what we're seeing.
Previously, I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. Previously, you were showing capital expenditures were drawing down all of the reserve revenue
Yes.
starting into. What would be an example of that capital expenditure that we're anticipating in 2029, which is when your charge started dropping off?
In 2020, well, so those are larger water mains, I believe, water line projects. We are trying to strategically draw that down. You know, originally that was for a pump station.
Pump stations, yeah, we've been working those.
Which we kind of found out that is actually, the cost of that is gonna be outweighed in 21 or 04 or something. So
Okay.
we decided to kind of use some of those funds initially, and then also, if you saw in that last slide, we actually started to kind of set aside some money for that pump station as well. So you can kind of see that reserve kind of going up.
I'm just curious what kind of capital projects you saw us having to do that we're gonna draw down those reserves.
Yeah, and I think most of those are line replacements and line repairs.
Water tank's in there somewhere, isn't it?
That was the surprising thing. Folks Phil works with regularly that maintain our tank. He asked the point blank, it's like, when should we plan to have this tank replaced? And they said properly maintain this tank will last another 80 years.
80.
80.
So none of us have to worry about that.
Yeah, I would be surprised with that number.
Yeah, well, just paint it and keep going.
Yeah.
Does this take into consideration what the county may charge us for water going
Yes,
forward?
yes, so that's a big part of the operational expenses, and we actually use customer data and those rates that they're charging you, their contracted rates, to come up with those costs
Okay.
year over year.
Good question.
And then, on the sewer side, like I said, this is definitely subject to change. We get final numbers on that sewer evaluation. But, it's a little bit of a simpler picture. Right now, we're just looking at those operational expenses and then the $250,000 in cash capital each year. So we're really looking at more inflationary increases on the sewer side, or 3 to 4% year over year. And really, that's kind of keeping up with the treatment or sewer treated costs and other inflationary operating expenses.
No real increase in the number of sewer lines we have though, right?
Not yet.
We're not anticipating,
Not this-
not yet, okay.
Does adding customers, is it a win for us to add a customer, or is it a net loss to add a customer? On average, because I know some are probably a win, some are probably a loss, but let's just say if the sewer increased, if we had some infill or whatever, it was 30 new residences in the existing area without putting any new lines down. Do we come out better, or does that make us fall farther behind? Do single residents pay the cost of a single residence?
So the way it should work, and most of the time it works, is the city always comes out ahead.
Always good.
Because the person who's applying for the service pays for that service, and I'm working with these guys to make sure that the city also pays for any overhead, i.e. his time and his guy's time to get that service online. And then, of course, they pay an impact fee on top of that, and then, of course, we have to begin to charge them for their service.
And this rate study will also include the impact fees, if we're setting those appropriately, the install fee, the tap fees.
Yes, sir, exactly.
Very good, thanks.
Touch on that there, yes.
Get us across the board.
Yeah.
Just a future question, do you have other municipalities that you may work with? Do they start water collection programs or cisterns to help with gray water perhaps? Because that's a big increase over the next, half decade. I mean, do you see municipalities doing that at all?
Kind of saving up for that, those tanks and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Like
yeah.
Australia does, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, definitely that, we see that across the board, just kind of that future planning for those larger capital projects. Right here, we're building up that, actually trying to build up that reserve fund as well for those tank projects, for example. But yeah, I think in our opinion, we've
Okay.
seen that.
What to look at.
And one thing to add there, I don't mean to butt in, but these increases that you see here, that kind of the total bill, kind of in the 5.5% range, our firm's been doing a national rate survey for the last 20 plus years, and that's right in line with the rate of change for water and sewer rates across the country. And then even locally, we work with Mount Pleasant and North Charleston, work with Orangeburg. There's a lot of communities around here that we work with, and many of them are planning right in that 5% range. Some may be, a little bit lower, some might be a little bit higher, but 5% is kind of right there in the middle with a capital intensive industry like water and sewer.
Okay, thank you.
I think, yeah.
All right, now I'm taking the wheel. Again, my name's Will Carr, and thanks so much for having us. So, Ford talked about the overall need in revenues, and so now I want to talk about how we intend to recover those increases in revenues. So, just kind of as a quick refresher, here's our existing user rate schedule. We got monthly and quarterly minimum charges, then we got that inclining block 4-tier volumetric structure, where the price of water increases, with the more that you buy. On sewer, a very simple structure. We got the $35.90 minimum charge, and then the $7.98 per 1,000 gallons volumetric charge.
I really like how block one covers the average user. So the average user never hits tier 2 of the rate, really, because at 15,000 quarter, that's 5,000 a month, and the rate doesn't go up till 7,000.
Yep.
I mean, that's important for individual houses that realize that they're gonna pay the least amount rate-wise as anybody if they stay below the average of, well, actually 50% of the average, 7,000 instead of 5,000.
Yep, that's a great observation, and really exactly what we're looking into. So we have run an analysis. We took all the customer billing information. We've run an analysis, and we can share this with you, that shows, it kind of plots, how customers are using water. And what we're seeing is your median customer is right around 15,000 gallons per quarter, so 5,000 gallons a month, which is pretty standard. So you're exactly right. A customer using water steadily year-round, right there at the median, is probably never going to go into tier 2. And that's exactly that's what we're evaluating here. Is our structure fair? Does it make sense?
It encourages water conservation.
Yep.
To stay out of the higher tiers.
That's right. And you must be reading off of my notes here.
That's just lucky, I guess.
So we've been spending some time kind of evaluating and thinking through your current structure. We think there's a lot of strengths. You've got good fixed revenue recovery. You've got pretty high minimum charges, so that's good stable revenue year-round. Promotes conservation. You're incentivized to conserve economically. I think another thing it does well is address the seasonal demands. So, in the peak season, when resources are strained, that's when water becomes more expensive. That's why you have to oversize your lines to be able to meet those peak demands. So what your structure does is it pushes that incline block structure, it pushes cost towards those folks using more water to make sure that they're recovering that on a seasonal basis. Sewer, another strength, sewer super simple structure to administer and maintain. Some challenges that we see are really all tied to this seasonality concept. You do have a high minimum charge, and some folks may say, hey, for low volume users, that's a pretty high minimum charge. But what that does is it provides stable revenue year round. And so if there are homes around that are not using a whole lot of water during the off season, they're still going to be contributing to those fixed costs of the system, even if they're not using a lot of water. Another thing is kind of balancing this non-residential, residential recovery, and with everybody going through that same tiered structure, we've got a lot of commercial usage kind of getting up into tier 3, tier 4. But again, it's that seasonal concept. If you're demanding our resources during the peak season, you're gonna pay a higher price for it. So in general, in our opinion, the structure is in pretty good shape, consistent with what we see other places. We have a couple of ideas we wanted to bounce around with you guys. If you go to the next slide, there's kind of 3 things that popped into our mind that could be considered. They all have pros and cons, and I'll quickly go through each one of these things if that's okay. So first one, minimum charges by meter size. We go to the next slide. What this would do is you'd have an increasing minimum charge by meter size, so larger meters would pay a little more on a monthly basis. That's better alignment with cost of service principles. Challenges is you got to administer. You got more fees to administer, and you got to make sure you got all your meter size information squared up. The next thing that we're looking into and wanted to put out there is adjusting tiers and usage thresholds. So kind of going off that example earlier, if you like having that 7,000 gallon cutoff, if you were to move that down to 5,000 gallons, for example, then you might pick up a little more revenue in tier 2, but you're gonna have some customers now kind of creeping in there. So you have to think through that change, make sure that it makes sense. And the challenge there is that impacts are gonna vary. As you start changing that tiering, customer impacts are gonna vary based on how much water you use. And then the other thing that crossed our mind, this one I'm a little bit mixed on, is decoupling that supplier rate. So you guys buy water from Charleston on a wholesale basis that you sell to your customers. And then when you collect sewer, you send it to James Island. I think it ultimately goes all the way to Charleston. But you guys pay James Island and Charleston to provide you wholesale service. And one thing you could consider doing is actually physically carving that rate out so that it's so that it's clear to folks as that rate changes. That it's sort of outside of your control. Now the challenge is that's another line on the bill, and you'd have to kind of rethink the way that your tiering is done to make that work. So let me pause there. I know that's a lot, but I heard one comment about kind of the tier 1 cutoff suiting sort of the average residential customer well. Are there other thoughts or feedback that you guys have on the structure?
We have done pretty well about, we haven't decoupled it and listed it as a separate line, but we have taken rate increases from Charleston and just passed it on and added it in, haven't we? We're not losing when we go up, we keep it.
And that's based on, in all your estimates, I would assume.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
The decoupling would just advise people, like,
It's
sort of like when you get your property tax, you pay this much for police, this much for
School
health.
system,
and-
yeah.
That's right.
I have a question, and you can tell me that it's off base, but is it any different when we look at multi-use dwellings or condominiums or things of that nature? How, is there that effect? Is it the same way?
Yeah, the multifamily is tough because a lot of times it's done through a master meter.
Mhm.
And Phil's probably the right one to give this instruction, but it typically just flows through one meter, unlike electric where they'll have
Right.
it all kind of sub-metered out.
So that's the meter that you refer to,
That's right.
that's it. It's as
Yep.
simple as that. It's
Yep,
not
that's right.
complicated.
The master meter, yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
And the quarterly, you could actually, if, like say you rented your house some, and then some months you didn't, the quarterly bills might be getting away with some really high usage in some months, and then coupling it up with a very low usage in some month and staying in tier 1, when really they should be paying some tier 2 money in 1 month, and
Possible.
and
to
staying
manage.
in tier 1.
Wouldn't
so-
it be a real management?
Well, we'd have to bill monthly
Yeah.
instead of quarterly, but that would be a benefit of monthly billing,
We
right?
just have to look at how difficult that is for us to manage, yeah.
Right.
'Cause there's cost involved with that, yeah.
Yeah, the individual, I think what you're getting at is like an individualized structure, and that starts getting real complicated, for sure. But,
Well, for readers that read themselves,
yeah.
it might be easier.
I don't think Phil wants to go with that.
Let's have a staff study, Phil, on that one, whenever you get time.
I know I'm up against timeline. The other thing is we are evaluating the upfront fees. Just real quickly, we'll look at the impact. We're looking at the impact fees, which is kind of that cost of capacity that new customers would be buying into. Here's our existing fees here. We're thinking about potentially scaling this fee based on meter size, especially for water. That would make a lot of sense. So our calculations, there might actually be a little bit of up and down. The smaller meter might be in good shape, but as we scale up, that fee could go up.
Is this kind of like tap fees, or?
So tap fees are on the next slide, which are more the physical cost to connect. So this would be making that physical connection. And these are definitely the water taps in particular are on the low side.
But this has gotta be a very small percentage of our revenues, the
Oh,
tap
yeah,
fees
that's
and the
new,
impact
new
fees.
construction.
That's exactly right.
So even if we doubled the amount, I don't know, does it go from 2% of our revenue, and then it becomes 4% of our revenue, or 1 becomes 2? But it would be very, very low.
Yeah, it's probably something in that range, yeah.
Doesn't help us a whole lot.
Well, if you think of any other questions or comments, please, Lee, if you could maybe help us with any dialogue, but we'll be back in March to present the final recommendation for actual action.
All right, we're good. Thank you.
Of course.
4 or 5 minutes. 5. Get started. No, we gotta start at 7.
at
No, wait, sorry.
Cheat sheet.
Yes.
Cheat sheet.